you're you're beyond an accomplished individual in terms of your field. I'm like, oh my God, when Don first showed me your resume, I was like, what? It's like, this guy's not gonna want to talk to me.
Oh man, come on, man. I got into the business because I was a music listener first, like everybody else. So
Yeah, gotcha.
it's one of those things that I think kind of unites everybody in what we do is, you know, granted there are a couple different schools, right? I mean, there's music listeners and there's equipment listeners. I mean, let's be honest, we have different people have goals in their listening and their listening experience, and some people's are different than others, and that's all good. The many colors in the rainbow, as it were.
Like the first thing that piqued my curiosity, and that's the idea that a mastering studio uses tubes.
Well, sure, why not? Tubes are
Don't
free,
get me
man.
wrong. I think it's amazing. I just, the unfortunate buzz of the internet of the experts is always like tubes. Tubes are for fun. It's like, okay,
Well, I think it depends. I mean, I think if you're talking, it depends on the implementation, right? It's like anything. And the way we're not implementing them in the traditional way that you would in a hi-fi or listening playback environment where you're typically going to it's going to be your preamp and your power amp. We're implementing it on the low level side before all that in terms of preamp tubes processing. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're not necessarily using the tube for its non-linearity or pushing it into the blush point. We're really using it for its linearity. So at least those are the kind of tube circuits that I tend to appreciate.
okay,
And there's different styles, I have two tube pieces in my desk. I have a Tim DePeravicini EAR 825Q, which has been just lightly modified to make it a little quieter.
okay.
And that has Wathen cryotone tubes in it. Um, and then I have an Inward Connections TSL5. But both of those devices they really aren't designed to push the tube into really heavy distortion. The way they're really optimally used is to sort of extract dimension from the sound with the tubes, which usually doesn't mean you're driving them really hard.
I'm just curious. What were some of the key difference? Like when you switched to Wathen, was that a long time ago or like,
It was years ago now. I got connected to Don through a friend of mine, one of my best friends from growing up, who's a equipment rep, and we were at the NAM show probably 10 years ago, maybe.
okay,
And he said, "Hey, man, I you got to come to this booth. Like, if you got a minute, let me drag you over to this booth. It's Wathen Audio. It's this guy Don. It's family-run business. Like, they're doing these tubes. You use tubes, right?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, what? Like, do you have tubes or like what?" I said, "Well, at the time, I was using NOS Telefunken tubes." Which
oh
I mean, at the time they were 300 bucks a piece.
yeah,
They're probably
they're even
500
more. Yeah, they're
bucks a
way
piece.
more now.
And I need eight. So it gets expensive. And when you're running the gear day after day after day after day after day, like this is all I do. Um, it's not a hobby. So like the tubes do they get noisy and you have to replace them. So he
100%.
said, "Well, this guy's got these tubes and he does this treatment to them and they're quieter and they last like basically forever." And so I said, "Okay, well, let's check it out." And he sent me tubes and I was just very honest. I said, "Listen, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm just going to be honest here. There's a pretty hard divide between studio people and audiophile people in the
Oh,
camps. So I was very reluctant to sort of like get open the door to sort of potential audiophile audio foolery or whatever you want to, whatever they call it. Um, but Don was just he's like, "Dude, I'll send you a set of tubes. Try them. If you like them, we'll figure it out. I'll like get you a cost deal or whatever, and if not, then we like to send them back and no harm, no foul." I'm like, "Cool." And I said, "But just I can't lie. I would love to stop having to source and hunt because I mean, I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this will identify like if you're a tube person, you're basically always shopping for tubes. You're
yep.
every now and like when you have an idle moment, you're popping on whatever your common marketplaces are to see what's new in. Did anybody find a new case of something? Or like you're sort of always, it's like me with like lathe parts or mastering gear. It's like I'm kind of always checking on where stuff's at just because some of the stuff that we use is pretty rare. And when it comes up, you got to get on it really quick. So,
Yeah.
um,
I gotta say though, that for me that stopped about a year ago as soon as I start popping in Crytone. Once I
Yeah.
started popping in cryotones, I'm still looking at tubes, but I'm looking at cryotones to replace the
Yep.
ones that are not cryotone at this point.
Agreed. Agreed. I'm exactly the same. And I have two of those. Yeah, I have a studio here in Los Angeles where I am now. And I have a studio in Virginia, Williamsburg, Virginia as well. And that I have an EAR in each one of those, and they both have cryotones in them. That have been in there. The ones in LA or the ones in Virginia, I think have been in there since 2017. I
Wow.
mean, the tubes just last
Wow.
and they sound amazing. I found that they were quieter. They have a much quicker warm-up time in terms of how soon I can use them before sort of the noise settles. And 92 has a little bit of noise as it goes through
Yeah, for
its
sure.
warm stage. I find they settle way faster and they just last forever. So
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
have
That's amazing.
zero complaints. And I never changed them. They're the same exact set of tubes that he sent me originally. We've had a tube stage in the desk as long as I've been mastering, basically. And
Awesome.
it's been one of those things that it's one of the boxes in my desk that as soon as you put it in, people in the room just sort of like, what did you just do? And it's like, actually nothing. I just engaged the gear. But the nature of the gear is that the transformers in the tube stages are in even when you're not boosting or cutting.
Okay.
So you're getting the sort of, as they say, box tone in our business
Huh.
um, for that box. But I love it. But there's also different, if there's very popular devices, a Manly Massive Passive. That's a little more, I would say, tubey.
Okay.
And there might be some people that would argue with me on that, but I disagree with them. And most of the Manly gear tends to exhibit a little more sort of overt tubiness. I think they're
Yeah.
really sort of leaning into um, what you can do with tubes in an audio stage. Most of the gear I use is a little more, I try to go for a little more transparency. Although that's less and less. I mean, it's evolved, not to go off on a tangent, but when I got into mastering, most of the work in the edict was do no harm. So it was half dB adjustments, quarter dB adjustments, very minor touches. And I remember sitting in the back of the room as an assistant at the beginning, and they would punch the EQ in and out. The tradition back then was the engineer would get the EQ going, and then you sort of punch it in and out for the client so they could hear before and after. And they'd sort of thumbs up, and then they would print that over to the tape, to the master tape. And I remember sitting in the back of the room, sort of thinking like, I, I don't know if I can do this job because I don't hear any real difference between the before and the after. And it was a long time before I understand that, like, a lot of times if you're dealing with really good mixes and really good recordings, mastering isn't something you notice when you add it. It's something you notice as missing when it's taken away. And
Huh.
that's one of the things that I think it makes it hard for so many people to be like, I don't understand. I can't explain to you why it feels good or why it sounds good to me. It just feels really well mastered. It feels really well balanced. It's like if you took it away, it wouldn't. And that's kind of where the rubber hits the road with mastering for me. These days, sometimes we're doing a lot bigger lift or heavier lift in the mastering room because the artist is looking for that, a little more creativity. So whereas previously, like in the 90s, a lot of my gear was very, very transparent, Sontex and GMLs and that kind of thing. Now it's morphed into more like EAR, inward. I have a lot of the Maslek gear. I like the Great River, which is sort of like a mastering take on a Neve sound EQ. The Whitestone P331, which is they call it a tube loading amplifier, but the tube stage actually is in the detection side of the circuit. It's actually a discrete circuit in there, but things that give you more flavor out of the analog desk as opposed to things that sort of step out of the way and just do corrected duties. Because to be quite frank, all that work is now I'm doing it in the box. It's there. The plugins are there. They're high resolution. The models are being done by, I mean, the Sontec plugin is done by Burgess McNeil, has his signature of approval, and I have not met a single master engineer that does not swear by it already. It's remarkable. It can be done now. It has a little more personality and through it, much like all the old consoles that most of the records that we know and love were mastered or recorded or mixed through. They had a signature and a flavor and a sort of a fingerprint and a curve to
I
them.
believe that.
And devotees, they can tell you what room a recording was recorded in just based on the reverb, right? Based on that's the chain, that's Capitol Chambers. Oh, that's 30th Street. Like people know, people that
Yeah,
know
those
know.
those those are some trained ears. I mean, it happens, right? It's and
Yeah,
anyone who's heard that enough times over the years, you just know.
yeah. So
I mean, I'm so like a stupid parallel for people who don't believe this is true. This is true of any field of any expert. Yesterday, I took my father with one of fishing with one of the best fishing guides I know on the planet, and he's telling us to throw the rods because we're moving, we're trolling around, and he could tell if we put in the rod wrong. He's like that rod's wrong. He's like, what do you mean? The sound is off. It's like you have a hook tangled at the end. I'm like, what? You can tell that? Yeah, I can tell because anyone who you're so used to it, it becomes like a mechanic and a it's like training a muscle. They just know. So I mean, this what you're describing in terms of knowing what room just based on the reverb, that's phenomenal.
yeah.
You
And
know,
this is a room like I don't have $300 power cables in this room. I don't have cable lifters in this room. My speaker cables are not, the size of your thigh. There's like no alchemy in here. Like it's just the higher end, but standard studio issue Mogami wiring. It's like it's
right?
like everything in here is pretty normal stuff. And in the studio world, it's basically the same thing that almost every studio in LA is wired with a couple exceptions. But so I'm not one, as I said, to sort of double down, and I don't want to belabor the issue, but I'm not one to buy into some stuff just because it's like hyped up. I'm sort of,
Oh, for
quite
sure.
frankly, I'm a pretty well-known contrarian when it comes to that stuff, and I'm more than likely to say things that will offend people when it comes to it. But they're the real deal, and I'm happy to put my stamp of approval on them.
I mean, heck, you were talking about before. You're surrounded by a bunch of people, including yourself, that can tell what room this recording was made in just by the reverb, by the sound. So it's not like you guys don't have finely tuned ears.
Mhm.
So the fact that you have these finely tuned ears, if you guys heard a massive difference, let's say with speaker cables that are this big, you probably would have them. But I'm sure some of these people around you have tried them and went, you know what, no, something's off there.
Yeah, I've tried some. My opinion on most of that stuff is that it's not that it's bad. It's just that it's in many cases, I'm not sure it's measurably better.
Mm,
But I also understand that there's every market has many levels, and there's
yeah,
products and services for every consumer at every level. And if there's a demand in a market, then a product or a service rises up to meet it. And so there winds up being, $350,000, amplifiers. I I'm still running like Bryson SST2s, but I'm colloquial like that.
so then like what makes you pick, let's say you had to change a pair of studio speakers. What makes you pick a new pair? Let's say if you had the pairs that you have stop working for whatever reason, you have to buy a new pair. What's the stuff that you listen for?
Well, that's probably a bad example. I've been on the same brand of speakers for like 25 years.
No, that's okay. Well, that's just as
I
good
would
of an answer then.
so I run PMCs as my main stereo, and then I have we're full 914 Atmos in here as well, and that's all PMC as well.
Nice.
And I've been a PMC guy for years. The thing I like about PMCs, and I can tell you, they all sound the same. Every set of PMCs sounds like every set of PMCs, from the smaller ones to the very great big ones. It's just really amount of it. They're
Awesome.
all voiced to be similar. So any room that has PMCs in it, I can walk into and I can understand it within like 10 or 15 seconds. I know what I'm hearing
That's
without
amazing.
needing to sit down and run through my own personal references and things like that. I can understand what they're doing
Yeah.
in a way that helps me sort of I don't know, it's like more, it lets you get sort of more telepathic, right? Like you don't,
Yeah.
if you have to think about what you're doing, then inherently you're sort of filtering yourself. And I don't want to think about what I'm doing. I like to say I play the mastering console the same way that I play the drums. I sit down behind the kit and I react musically to what I hear. Sometimes that's with guidance with a producer, or another engineer. I did a whole series of records with Steve Hoffman where he would sort of say, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And then I dial it in. Sometimes I'm just sitting here, more or less these days, I'm sitting here by myself since COVID. Um,
Yeah.
and going back and forth. And I mean, the truth is, like, I'm not dropping new gear on my desk every year. So I kind of know what everything does well and what it doesn't do well and what I can use it for. So when I hear something and I decide that I want to do something to it, I kind of already know where I'm going to go, what I'm going to grab to make that happen.
Mm.
Um, and so I don't have to really think about what I'm doing. It becomes sort of, like I said, sort of telepathic or subconscious. And because mastering is like you know, I always equate the difference between mixing and mastering is mixing because you have individual discrete control over all the elements in the mix. You're inherently mixing from the inside out. If you need to make the bass guitar feel a little fatter, you go in, you put a little EQ or compression or something on the bass guitar track or
Mm.
raise the volume. If I need to do that, then I have to figure out a way to manipulate the stereo image or the Atmos image in a way that accentuates that fatness in the bass guitar, but doesn't necessarily detract from any of the other things that are going on because everything that I do affects the whole. So everything that I do has to reference the whole. So it's very much outside in listening as mastering. And that's why it's really hard. People say, well, why can't you just mix and master at the same time? And some people do, and some people have success at it. But generally speaking, when you're looking to really, when you're looking for the purity, when you really want the ideal mix, you really need to be inside the mix. You can't also simultaneously be outside the mix.
Mm.
And if you want the ideal master, the exact opposite is true. You need to be fully outside of the mix. I can't be That's one of the reasons I like some guys will work from stems. Stems, it seems to be dying down these days. For Atmos, a lot of times we work from stems, but stems is when instead of delivering a standard stereo mix, they will deliver stereo pairs of things, meaning here's a stereo pair of all the drums, here's a stereo pair of all the guitars, stereo pair of all the horns, the string, whatever there might be in the mix. It's sort of like a halfway point between a multi-track and a stereo mix. And the idea being that here's a little bit more breakout and a little bit more control, but all of any EQing that we've done to the guitars, any reverbs and things, that will all be baked into those stereo pairs. So theoretically, if you get a stem mix, you can take all those stereo pairs and line them up at zero on a console, and you'll create their stereo mix again.
Mm.
So it's sort of like a halfway point, and that allows you to really manipulate things. And some guys like to get that granular. For me, I want the artist to commit. I want them to say, I put my time and my energy and my heart into this thing. This is it. Just put the frame around it. That's where I want to be. Because if the artist isn't confident in what they're bringing into me, then how can I gain their trust and confidence in what I give back to them? Like it all
Exactly.
comes from them, that they're the
Good point.
foundation. I'm
No,
I'm
that's a good
I'm
point.
additive and I'm directive. I'm not formative. I'm not inceptive. So it has to come from them. So I don't want them to bring anything into me that they're not completely. I mean, maybe they have some I'm not sure if the bass is sitting right in this. Could you like, what do you like? I understand if they want to have some consultation, that's 100% what I'm here for. And the benefit of my experience is what they're paying me for. There's where I bring value to the equation. But I don't want them to be like, I'm not sure if this bass guitar works. I'm
Mm.
not sure if this vocal's good enough. Like the creative decisions need to be made. We just need to worry about the parameters of how do we make this palatable within the context of a commercial marketplace where we're going to take your art and then place it for sale and ridicule or critique or celebration
Yeah.
or maybe all those things by different people at the same time. And we got to make that all work. So it's,
I was always being told is like, look, if when you're talking about stereo imaging and what develops in other words, a soundstage, guys are always telling me, no, 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 like those are the audio engineers and the mixing that do all that. It's like the mastering guys don't play with any of that. And I was like,
oh, right.
there's got to be
Yeah.
some of that, but you kind of hinted at sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't need to. It depends.
If I can avoid working from stems and I can avoid working from multi-tracks, I generally try to. And I'm talking about stereo work now.
Yeah.
Like I said, because I kind of want the artist to commit to it and I want to know, okay, I want to be able to build on that. Some guys, it was popular a few years ago, and within specific genres, it remains somewhat popular, EDM particularly.
Okay.
Because EDM is so heavily processed, it can be beneficial to be able to get into the individual stems and really clamp things or really shape things. Excuse me. To be able to, some of what we're trying to do in mastering is to get some more dimension. So I always say it's kind of like there's like little, there's sort of like little hot buttons that you can sort of push on music sonically, and it kind of makes the jack pop out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where you just hear a song where you don't. it's not necessarily that's the widest thing you've ever heard image-wise or the tallest thing or the deepest thing, but it has elements of all those things enough that it engages you and it maintains your interest as a listener.
Yeah.
So I find I like to get, sometimes it can be beneficial in certain genres to have stems, but for the most part, I'm just working from stereo material. And that's my, so I'm always inherently outside in listening, as opposed to inside out listening. And that's really my philosophy. And like I said, I've done some mixing and mastering at the same time. And depending on the material, I always say that like I'll stems for Atmos, like we do, we'll handle whatever they have. But for general stereo mixing, I don't really want to, me personally, I'm not really capable of handling more than maybe 8 to 12 channels because it's just not the way that my brain works. It's not the way
Gotcha.
that I hear. I need it to be well recorded and simple, and then I can blend it and get it prepped so that I can and prepped and then I can master it. And we've done plenty of that. Typically, that's reissue stuff, and that's usually like 3-track mixing, 4-track mixing, and 8-track mixing.
Okay.
I'm extremely comfortable doing that work. Once it gets above that, I know people that are so much better at that, and that's all they do.
Hmm.
And I would no sooner try to attempt to do that myself instead of calling them than I would expect them to attempt to master something or cut a record, versus calling me. So
Okay. So I had a feeling that this was definitely done. I mean, because especially when you do it with remasters, there's one example that came to my mind was the Last Waltz by the band. There's, I don't know, like 4 or 5 different remasters over the last few decades, and one of them positions the instruments where they're not specifically coming out of the left or specifically coming out of the right, where you feel like they have more of a presence in the recording. It sounds nice. And some of the masterings, it's just absolutely horrendous. Everything is sitting one on top of each other on the left, and everything's sitting on top of each other on the right. And I'm like, guys, there's a lot of space here that you could have played with. So okay, that makes sense.
there's unfortunately a lot of, and this happens a lot, and I've come up against this too, like anything that is being remastered from the tape era, and that's most stuff that we're talking about, let's be honest,
Yeah,
these days. Um, it has to be played back on a machine that wasn't the machine it was recorded on. And because we're talking about a piece of, like, you have a recording head and you have a tape wrapping around it, this has to be right. This has to be right. This has to be right. The wrap has to be right. There's 4 or 5, I think it's technically 5 different, this has to be right. There's 5 to zenith, azimuth, yada, yada, yada.
yeah,
um, 5 different geometric planes in which have to be perfected in order to recreate the record curve, and the curvature of the head and the width of the head recording gap needs to be the same.
yeah. It
Now,
has
those things never happen.
it's
So
probably
what
more
we do
insane
is
than setting up a turntable these days. It's
correct, correct.
ah
Um, you except the thing with the turntable is technically easier because you don't have wrap on a turntable.
ah
You have azimuth, you have zenith, you have all these things, but you don't have wrap.
okay.
Um, so we do our best. The thing we have the most control over, usually most of the things are set and fixed on a machine. The one thing that is typically variable, and on some of the earlier machines it is not, but on most modern machines it is the azimuth. And if the azimuth is incorrect, it will completely destroy the intended stereo image of the playback. A lot of a lot of transfers have been done over the years without correct azimuth adjustment or azimuth correction. In fact, without naming names, there's one very, 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 very large tape vault company in this country that has kind of consumed a lot of label vaults that is sort of notorious for transferring stuff with absolutely no mind paid to what the azimuth of the playback is. So you have to do all your azimuth corrections digitally after the fact. And they pretty much don't release the tapes once they send them in. So it's kind of a nightmare.
And if you have
Um,
to do that digitally afterwards, I'm assuming like anything that you have to do digital that was actually on tape comes with a consequence. So you might
yeah,
think you're
well, I
fixing
mean,
one thing, but it comes at the cost of this.
the trick, I mean, so much of like what the remastering that I've typically done, and one of the reasons why I don't do much of it anymore is because this paradigm shift has really occurred in about the last decade where we used to be able to get tapes.
Mm,
Not that long ago, we could really get the real tapes, get them on the right machine, and spend the time to get them really dialed in because I'm getting paid a flat fee to get the most amazing sounding version of X, Y, or Z. I'm
Yeah.
not getting paid by the reel to crank through as many transfers as I can that night,
Mm.
right? And let's be honest, that's what, these tape file companies, that's what they're doing. They're buzzing through this crap with minimum wage employees and no industry knowledge on poorly maintained equipment. It's not ideal. And that's what's being used to source masters because those companies, by contract, do not let the tapes back out. They
So if
require
so,
that by contract, they get to transfer a certain gross percentage of the entire stored assets. And they also get to determine when and how those assets are released from the archive.
hmm.
So the label basically turns over all responsibility and rights to the artist's tapes to
So
these vault.
am I correct now in assuming that in that context, if you have this company that is not properly paying attention, you mentioned the azimuth before, which will create a ton of problems, which will create a new source, which then could be used to then create a new pressing of a vinyl record, but that's going to be essentially flawed because of what was there.
Yeah,
But now, if you do the same uh, neglect when it comes to the vinyl pressing and whatnot, then you end up with these brand new records that are horrible sounding, and because of layers over layers over layers
yeah,
of just neglect.
yeah. Well, and when you've got, I'm gonna make no friends with this video, but you have when you
It's
have
gonna
a
be on
sort
the
of
internet, Stefan.
so
It's
much of
no one
the
makes friends on the internet.
good. I mean, so much of the impetus behind putting out release. I mean, let's be honest, it's a commercial business, and I get that. And they
Yep.
want to put out the stuff that is the most popular. The most popular stuff has been put out the most, and the tapes are in the worst shape. So the chances are those tapes have been harmed or degraded or damaged is pretty high or transferred poorly. The trick is you really do need to get the original tapes, get them on a good machine, and then take your time to get great transfers. That's what made Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs a great, you know, them doing when we were doing the audio fidelity titles, that was what our secret sauce was. It wasn't that we were the best, the most bitchin' mastering dudes in the world. We had the right tapes, and I would spend hours getting them dialed in to get them to play back just right, so that when we did the captures, we didn't have to do a ton of EQ. They just sounded right. They didn't need a bunch of correction because we were being played back properly.
Yeah.
And it's harder and harder to do that. And almost all the mastering that I've done, remastering work that I've done since maybe 2020 has all been from previously transferred digital transfers that I got from vaults, from label vaults. So, and that's just is what it is. And I don't mean to judge it, but it
Yeah, the I
is
think a few
unfortunate
years
that,
ago, the whole hi-fi world exploded because they all realized that that's what was happening with even with mobile fidelity for a few years.
yeah, I mean, that it yeah, it's a shame because I feel bad because part of the art, like I came in when I first started mastering at Sony in the 90s, I was on the West Coast and I was working with David Mitson was the master engineer. And there was a producer for Legacy Recordings, which was the Sony's big reissue label, um, named Lawrence Cohn. And Larry was like an expert on blues music, and he ran a series called the Roots and Blues series. And I think one of the very first, if not the first release, was the Robert Johnson box set, which kind of like put Larry on the map in terms of a reissue producing. He had done producing before that, and I'm probably shortchanging him on his career, but he's unfortunately since passed away, so he can't complain. Oh, so we were doing predominantly blues reissues of, I mean, you name it, everything. Columbia, okay, Epic. I mean, their catalog of blues artists is deep and wide. So, maybe the first 250 or 300 records I ever worked on mastering were reissues from tape. Um, and you learned how to do it the right way
Hmm.
because again, the goal was we need a product that sounds better than anything else. And we were also aware at Sony at the time that what we were working with were essentially historical documents, and we needed to honor them and protect them. And that we're always thinking like every time you put a tape on a machine, you assume it's the last time that tape's ever going to get played. That was how I was taught, and that's how I was trained. And I've put tapes from everywhere from the 30s all the way through to modern day on machines, and every time, regardless I always assume it's the last time that tape is ever going to play, and I better make sure that I get a capture of it that's worthy. So, everything's got to be right as far as as far as it can be, and the fun part is like when you put the tape on the machine and you're like, oh, Roy Dunan recorded this in 1956, you know,
Yeah,
like that's Sonny Rollins,
yeah.
and I'm listening to the tape that Roy Dunan printed the Sonny Rollins mix to on my
Historical
machine.
historical documents. You
It's
said
a
it
fucking
perfect.
time machine, man.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And that's one of the things that's unfortunately sort of been lost through the kind of the outsourcing of archives. The upshot is the warehouses don't burn down anymore. In the tape era, because things were so it was such a volatile format. You're scraping a piece of metal coated tape across a glass head to play it back. Like we made safety copies and working copies and slave reels. And I mean, there were multiple copies of so many things, backups, and almost every studio. When we were at Sony, we had a whole transfer room set up, and all they did was copy master tapes from the vault before those tapes went out to other studios for work. So if Humberto Gatica was going to mix a Barbra Streisand record over at Record Plant and all the tapes were checked into the Sony vault, they all came to the studio, they all got transferred and safetied off. Then those originals were sent off. So like every vault has multiple copies of everything, but the reality is like what you really want is the original, original, original.
Well, I'm
Um,
assuming when they make a copy, there could be some similar fuck ups that could happen
sure.
if the recording machine is not set up proper, or the sorry
With
the
analog, with analog, or honestly with digital, there's always going to be some kind of what they call generation loss.
yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, you've got some masters. I mean, God, we did some Bob Dylan stuff with Audio Fidelity, and we were getting masters where um, they were like the third and fourth generation masters of some of that stuff, and they're as original as it gets anymore because they've been put out like literally hundreds of times since the 60s. And some of the tape, like at a certain point, a tape just gets worn out, and it's like, okay, what's the next best safety? What's the next cleanest safety?
Yeah.
And a lot of tapes and a lot of vaults. So I don't mean to single out Bob Dylan, but there's a lot of tapes, a lot of vaults where you look at the master tape and you're like, is this the master tape? Because it says -3 on it. And this looks like a photocopy of the label that's been taped to the box. And you realize, oh, it's as close. And you call up the library and you talk to people like, no, the tapes have been damaged and they're beyond repair. They're DNU'd and means do not use.
Yeah.
They're DNU'd and that's as original as we can give you. Unless you want some of our digital transfers. They always offer the digital transfers, which is pleasant, but we try not to get those. But like I said, it's really changed, and things have. I know Mobile Fidelity had to adjust. I think they're having I think DSD transfers done in-house at the label studios.
Yeah.
Um, the bottom line is if you have the right people involved and they care, you're going to get great results. Like you can work within the paradigm that exists now. It's just a little more challenging, and you have to know where the potholes are to avoid them.
Okay.
To do this job well requires you to be extremely emotionally raw for a good portion of your day. You have to sit there and be willing to get taken over by music. And I mean to the negative and to the positive. It
Yeah.
will make you so fucking happy that you literally jump up out of the desk. And it'll also break you down and you literally just sit there crying where you have to push back and say, like, I can't, my ears are fucked up now. I can't really hear because I'm too emotionally engaged in what I'm hearing. And in order to do this job well, I really think you have to it's all got to be right here. You got to wear it right on your sleeve and be willing to get hit across the face with some shit that might shock you and really because it's about what you're trying to do in a mastering room isn't about make it bright or dark or loud or soft or whatever. You're trying to connect the artist to their audience. You are just a window between what they came up with and what they needed to say, the story they wanted to tell, the story they had to tell, and the people that want to listen to it and want to understand it and dive into it. And that's the thing, like artists, I've always said, like people like me will always have work because artists don't create out of desire. They create out of compulsion. They fucking have to do it. They have to.
I
They
think
can't stop it.
that's
And I
actually
mean
the
real
difference between
artists.
people. Yeah, I think that's the difference between people who try to be as opposed to those who just are.
in anything.
Yeah.
The guy that's like the kick-ass fucking bricklayer that does amazing shit. Like he doesn't just do it because he wanted it. He has to do it. It's what he has to do. And real artists, they have to do it. So I'm trying to capture that and make sure it doesn't get fucking bruised beyond recognition before it gets to their audience.
Yeah.
So it's about tapping into whatever kind of emotion they were trying to get out of that listener, being that listener, and then saying, okay, is there anything missing here? Is there anything that can I get any more out of it? Can I add anything else to it?
Hmm.
Is there any more can I heighten this any more? And sometimes it means it gets taller or wider or deeper, but those things aren't actually what we're trying to do. It's all about you emotionally react to it. And that's one of
Well,
the reasons why it can be, I think, really challenging for people to understand, like, I don't understand what mastering is like. I can just do that. It's like, no, you're thinking about what the tool, like mastering isn't the tools. It's 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 the creativity of the artist, and then you're building on that, and you're trying to find some way to add value to it in a meaningful way, in a way that allows the artist to feel like they had meaning and they got fulfillment out of the process too. And
it's almost like if we were to make this into like a visual thing instead of an audible thing, it's almost like the artist gives you a canvas and your job is to pick the right lenses for the right parts of the canvas to make those emotions pop.
is it going to be, yeah, getting the lighting set up right, getting the focus just right? Is it a little softer focus? Is it sharp focus?
Hmm.
Getting the framing right? Is it going to be letterbox? Is it going to be 4:3? Like all of those sort of things. And then in the context of an album, we're bracketing, which is something like again, a photography term, like where if you're shooting a set of pictures, you pick where your darkest dark is going to be and your lightest light's going to be, and you keep everything within that range or within those brackets.
Yeah.
In concept of an album length material, you're always bracketing, so you're always trying to keep things within a construct. And sometimes if a project really goes in a lot of different directions, you have to widen those brackets out. But in here, it definitely pays off to be, you gotta, you're, it's, there's little things that just as people and human beings that I've just learned over the years just always play out. And there's just little things that give me a greater connection to what I'm hearing. And, whether that's like sometimes if it's genre based, if it's a hip hop thing, at the bottom end has to feel right.
Yeah.
If it's vocal music, like the vocal has to sit just right. And I mean just right. And if it doesn't, then it's wrong. And if it does, then you can almost do whatever the hell you want with everything else. It's like those different things, genre based, where like I sort of know where those things how they need to feel, and I'm just looking for those feel points.
Is there a project, a group, individuals, artists, anything, current or old, past that you have never worked with yet that you would want to at this point? Is there anyone,
Oh
anything?
God.
And
Again, there's so many. And I thankfully I gotta say, like I've gotten to work with a bunch
oh man,
of artists that I am
the
like I sometimes I'll look through my own discography and be like, what how did I fucking get here? But yeah, I agree.
I first time I
I'm
saw
just as
your
simplified by it
discography.
as anybody. But I subscribe to the theory that, Bruce Lee said be like water.
Yeah,
My theory is my theory is be like mold. The thing that water leaves behind. Because
yeah.
mold, once you had it, man, you can't get rid of it. So I just sort of I'm the mold on the bottom of of the music mastering business, as it were. But no, I've gotten to work with a lot of my heroes. I mean, I grew up in the rock era, and I grew up in the '80s in New York, but in a time warp. The town that I grew up in, the most popular radio station in town for all of everybody that I knew growing up was the Album Rock station.
Right.
So we were listening like in the 80s when everybody else was listening to like Flock of Seagulls and stuff, like I was listening to Molly Hatchet and 38 Special and Skinner Band and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of grew up 10 years behind everybody. So when I came out to LA when I was 19 and got started in the studio business, and I was the kid. Everybody was like, "Hey kid." Like everybody just like that was because I was so much younger than everybody else in the studio at the time. And but one of the things that kind of endeared me to a lot of the older guard was that I knew all their music because I grew up in my dad's record collection and
Yeah.
listening to WCMF 96.5 in Rochester, New York with Brother Weeze. So it was all classic rock and album rock. And so that was uh it's those artists I think that I would like. I was a huge Kiss fan growing up. I would love to
Uh,
work on the Kiss catalog, but it's been done like half a dozen times already. So I think that ship has sailed. Sabbath, that ship has sailed. I did get to work. I did an album with Bill Ward. He came in a few times, and that was really cool to hang out with him and hear some of his stories. Because one of the very first sessions I ever did in the 90s when I first started working as an assistant was with Ozzy, and I got to listen to his stories of Sabbath. I worked a session with Ozzy Osbourne in 1995. No, it was 1996 on the anniversary of Jerry Garcia's death, which had happened the year before in 1995. I think it was in August, if I'm not mistaken. So he was sort of in a we were talking about Jerry Garcia and times that he had met him, and he was in a reminiscing mood. We were doing German radio IDs. So he was doing those like, hey, it's Ozzy Osbourne, and you're listening to whatever FM, except in German. And Ozzy doesn't speak German, so it's pretty funny. Um, I won't go into any more of that, but it was an enjoyable day. But he was reminiscing and talking about, um, but yeah, so there's a lot of artists that I'd love to work with, but the catalogs, so much of the catalogs have been done. But
it's true.
through the benefit of some, like I've gotten to do a bunch of Clapton records. Like I was a huge Cream and Eric Clapton fan growing up
Nice.
too, and some of the stuff from my generation as well, like the early 90s, like doing the Rage Against the Machine stuff and like getting to work with like rock, what I consider to be rock icons.
Hmm.
But there's still like, there's definitely stuff from my era, Jane's Addiction, Red Hot Chili Peppers, that I would love to work on. But again, it's like, to be honest, most of those records, the reason that I love them is because they were done so well to begin with. So I'm not sure they need me. I don't know if I'm not sure if I can bring enough value to the table there, but I think I'd still do it anyway, probably for free.
I'm gonna try to finish off with this because we've been on it for about an hour, and you've had a big day. I don't want to take any more of your time. From what you know with your ear, if you had to live the rest of your life with only one of the two records playing over and over, okay, one of them's not really a record, but it was put in a record between the Elvis '69 comeback special or the Beatles White Album.
Elvis all the way.
Man.
Again, I don't make friends on here.
Oh, I'm kind of with it. For me,
I
it's the always things work in threes.
Yeah.
It's like the first layer is the one that shows the world, hey, look, this is possible. The second layer is, all right, let me stretch this as far as I can, and the third layer is, all right, hold my beer, let me make this better. So for me, the first layer was Elvis, then the Beatles, and then Zeppelin.
They're not bad. Yeah, I grew up in a house. It was a lot of my friends' parents were Beatles parents, and we sort of like as kids, like my generation, we were kind of like we had some people were Beatles parents, and then some people were Beach Boys parents in
Oh yeah,
in my neighborhood. And my dad was a Beach Boys guy,
okay.
so I grew up listening to mostly Beach Boys and then California Cowboys, so like Eagles. Linda Ronstadt was huge. That's one that I got to do. Like I listened to a buttload of Linda Ronstadt records growing up, and I love Linda Ronstadt. My parents played it I mean, my dad would literally bump Linda Ronstadt. He would rock that shit. And and I would look on the records and I would see all these names, Val Garay and John Boylan. And last year or 2 years ago, I got to cut Cry Like a Rainstorm, the album that Linda did with Aaron Neville, who had like it was a number one record. It had like I think it had three number one songs. It was a Grammy winner, amazing record
Wow,
from the Doug Sachs Cutting Masters.
wow,
Got to cut that to vinyl, which was a fun with John Boylan in attendance at the cutting session, and it was
wow,
one of those that was definitely.
wow.
And like you have to be a record dork for that to like sort of do it for you, but like that was definitely one of my absolute pinch me moments. I mean, when I first came to LA, I took a class at UCLA that John Boylan taught simply because John Boylan taught it, just so I could like sit in the room and listen to him talk for an hour a week. Um, so that was really cool. This was
Well,
really enjoyable, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate
thank
the
you.
opportunity.
And thank you for
Really
all
do.
your work, man. Like half of the stuff you've done in your career, like I sit and listen to on a regular
Oh
basis.
man,
So,
thank
man,
you.
dude, thank you.
Thick bottom and silky top. That's my goal, man.
Very cool. All right, man. Have a nice evening and
Take care.
hope we talk soon. All right.
Bye bye.